This is a tutorial of how to merge photos together. And this one is a little bit more complicated because we're dealing with a painting. So I want to show some different techniques that you might want to utilize in your projects. So here's the final result. A pretty famous piece by Mocha. And we have the photo was taken again on a white-ish background and tied the hair back, really tried to not to show the entire face that we're going to substitute in for here. And here's the original and the final product. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to come over here and we're going to start by selecting out our original image. And in this tutorial, we're going to talk about masking. So masking is a way to fine-tune your selection even better than just the select and mask from the Smart Object. This I want total control. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not as concerned about the hair because we're not showing the hair. We're going to use the hair in the image. So I'm going to come around and I'm just going to make a pretty rough selection because I'm going to fine tune it. So I come around here and I'm just using the polygonal lasso tool. Zoom in a little bit. So if I hit delete on my mouse, I'll go back one. So if you wanted to, I love the polygonal lasso because I feel like I have the most control. That connect the dots around the nose ring. Those type of things are fun to kind of put your own personality in on the photo. And then I'll just take a little bit of this hair. Okay, and then we go back to the beginning. I can double click with my mouse. Oops, and I made one too many. To have our selection. So we have these running ants going around the image. That's our selection. We could bring this over and utilize this, but first I want to just fine tune this image a little bit. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to my masking tool. Now, if you have the two columns, it's going to be on the left-hand side right below your black and white foreground, background color. And it looks like a rectangle with a dotted circle in. If I roll over it, it says Edit in Quick Mask Mode. So I'm going to click that, and what that does is it kind of we get this red background. If you don't like that kind of red background, I believe if we could change that color, by double clicking on the quick mask, and you could change this to a different color. So if your background was red, maybe that's not the best color. And you can also take the opacity down, which I would do. So I would maybe make it like just 80%. Yeah, that's better. So what that does is I can still see some of the image behind it. It's not 100%. And now I can see like these little gaps and whatnot, and especially I'm mostly concerned with the face because the polygonal lasso tool sometimes makes very geometric edges, and I want to soften this up. So I'm in quick mask mode, and now I can use my brush tool. So if I have black on top in my foreground, it is subtracting from my image and adding to the mask, right? You can see how it's painting in the magenta. And if I go and click off the quick mask mode, you can see it fine-tuned that to something I don't want to happen, but it added to the selection. So this button is basically an on and off button to quick mask mode. So if I click on, we have the colored background, red or magenta, whatever color you pick. And if I click on it again, I'm turning that off and I'm going back to those running ants. So when I'm in quick mask mode, this is where I can change my selection. So if I have white on top, the opposite, I can paint in, which is kind of what I wanted to do instead. And I like it because I'm using the brush tool and it has a softer edge. And I can really get in here if I zoom in and fine-tune this selection. So if black is on top, I'm adding to the magenta area what you have cut out. And if I have white on top, oops, I'm adding to our final image. So I usually keep my finger on X, as in xylophone, on the keyboard because that is the quick shortcut to switch from my foreground to my background color. So if you notice I'm holding in, I'll zoom in so we can see this. This is our foreground and our background color. And if I wanted to switch them, I have to hit X on the keyboard. So you can see there, I'm switching back and forth. So I don't have to take my mouse and go all the way over there. So what I'm going to do is just go around my edge really quickly and you can fine tune. Remember that you can change the size of your brush at the top and the hardness level. So if you wanted more of a softer edge, you want to take your hardness down to 0%. If you want a really sharp edge, up to 100. I usually keep it somewhere in the middle. Oops. So I can just have a little bit of a feathered edge. Oh, okay. There it is. The computer just froze up for a second. Just play some catch up. Okay, so after I get through my whole image, then I'm going to turn off that quick mask mode, go back to my running ants, and now what I'm going to do is I want to bring this image over to my other image. So we can do this a lot of ways, but for now I'm just going to copy it, edit copy, edit paste, and bring that over. Here we can see. All right, so now we're going to start the process of merging these together. So first thing I'm going to do is I have my layers open. I always keep that open on the right-hand side. I'm going to go down to my background, and I don't want to directly affect the background. So I'm going to hit the Command J, or I could drag this into New Layer button, or if you're on a PC, Control J. And what that does is it duplicates that layer. So I'm not working on the original, I'm working on a copy. I'm going to rename this, self. That's not me, but let's pretend. And I'm going to also make a duplicate of that, so I have a copy of each, so I'm not working directly. And I'm going to hide the eyeball of that. Okay, so I'm working on a copy of myself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip her. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and here you can see how you can rotate, you can warp, you can scale, skew, distort, but you can also flip horizontally. So I'm going to flip her that way so she's facing the right direction. And then I'm going to scale her down. So I'm going to hit Command T as in Tom, Control T on a PC, go to the corner of my bounding box, and I'm going to hold Shift. Now what Shift does is it makes sure that we stay in proportion, right? So I want to scale her down, but I don't want to make her skewed or out of, so it still looks like you, right? All right, and we're going to kind of fit that in as best as we can, about there. Not too bad. All right, so now that that's in place, I'm going to hide this self copy as well. So I'm using my eyeballs in the layers to hide and show the visibility of a layer. Now what I want to do, if you notice, I want to bring that head, kind of the hair and the headband, and bring that on top of her. So I'm almost going to sandwich the self-portrait in the middle. So I'm going to hide the eyeball. I'm going to come down to background copy where that headband is. I'm going to go back to my polygon lasso tool, and I want to make a selection of the headband. So I'm going to come over here and select this down. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. We can always fine tune it. You could fine tune it with the masking or the shortcut selected mask. For now, I'm just going to make a quick selection. I mask everything because the polygonal is great for starting out. Ooh, I didn't need all that. But it just doesn't really make a perfect selection. Now I want the hair down here, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to go over and make a big selection here so it hides that bun or whatever hair thing. And then we go back to the beginning. So I made a selection. I have the running ants, and I'm going to copy paste again. I'm going to go edit, copy, edit, paste. So what that did was it made a selection. It copied and pasted whatever I had selected and put it on its own layer automatically, which is great. So you can see here I have that selection by itself. So what I want to do is I'm going to turn my eyeballs back on, and I'm going to move that copy paste, that little self, above hierarchy-wise on top of everything else. So what that does is, I can delete that for now. Basically, we have the headband, then the self copy, call this hair and band, then the self copy, the background copy, and background. So we're sandwiching it in. There we go. So we kind of scaled, right? That's in proportion. Now we just have to worry about coloring. And this is a little bit more complicated because it's a painting. It's not a photo. So I'm going to give you some techniques and that might help you in your process. So I'm on the face layer, and I'm going to make a copy of that. So I have two. We're going to use two, and we're going to use some blending modes to kind of try some different techniques. The first thing I want to do is on the first copy of self, so the lower level, I'm going to change the skin opacity to be more of this yellowish orange color. So on this layer, I have it selected in my layer palette. I don't need it selected with the selection tool. I'm going to go to my adjustments, and I'm going to go to hue and saturation. And I'm going to change the hue of that image. So I'm going to make it a little bit more orange. And I found if I hit colorize over here on the right-hand side, this is how you can kind of make sepia tone images. This will help. So I want to, let me find the right hue. There we go, in that area. I'm going to pop up the saturation to make it really kind of orangey. Better. So I have colorized it, changed the hue, and bumped up that saturation. I'm going to say OK. Good start. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to go to my second layer, the second version of her, and I'm going to kind of make it a painterly effect, like almost brush strokey. So we have some different filters in our filter gallery that you can check out. So if I go to filter, filter gallery, you can see, it's a little hard to see in that image, that you can play around with some of these artistic filters. So there's like a sponge, poster edges, kind of interesting, paint palette, dry brush. So this, again, you're going to have to play around with, and this is why I like making a lot of different copies of the same layer so I can try different things. Again, there's not one different answer. I'm going to do maybe the paint knife, and again, you can play around with this. Just trying to make it a little bit more painterly. Or maybe paint. Just a lot to play around with. Okay. So it kind of just gives a little bit more of that painterly feel. Put that on top. Now, this is where I want to blend, so I have these two different layers, but I want them to kind of work together. So on the second layer, I'm going to go here to my layers palette where it says normal. There's also opacity, right? So I could play around with the opacity of that layer. But I love these blending modes. So if you change this to multiply, it takes these two layers and blends them together, almost like film. So you can see now how those two work a little bit better together. So we have added a painterly effect. And now what I need to do is a couple things. So now that we have kind of the color in the right area, I want to, if you notice the original has this black outline, so I need to add that around it. We have a little bit of a neck issue going on here. So what we have at this point, now that I have it in the general area, I'm going to actually paint on the picture itself. In Photoshop, you hear airbrushing and photo illustration with Photoshop, and that's very possible. So this is how I would do that. So now above these two layers, I'm going to make a new layer all by itself. So if I hit this new layer button, create new layer, it creates a blank layer. I'm going to name this Black Strokes. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put black on top of my color palette. And I'm going to go to my brush tool. And this is where I can actually just paint right into this. I'm going to make sure my brush size is about right. And for this, I'm going to take the hardness to 100%. So it's almost like a marker. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller. Okay, we'll try that. And then I'm going to paint around this image. Now, a little tip while you're doing this that I'm doing, I have to go around the nose ring because that kind of makes it interesting, is if you hold, and I probably should have used a little bit of a thinner line. I'm just going to back up once. If you hold down Shift after you click, it's kind of the connect the dots again. So I can kind of just, since it is a little bit geometric, it has that painterly, I can go around here and just hold Shift instead of, unless you have a very steady hand, which I do not, unfortunately. You might have to paint this in. So I'll go all the way around this image to kind of get that same painterly effect. Try to go faster. Okay. And here I'm actually going to add right into the original line. I don't have to worry about that. And that kind of solves that issue. At this point, I could also, if you look at the original, there is some definitely black highlights in the picture, so I can paint right in here if I want to. On top of, I don't know if it leaves that bottom one, but that helps. So we're kind of getting that same effect here as we go forward. Now let's worry about the neck. So I'm going to make another new layer, and this one I'm going to say, neck, and I'm going to paint this in. So you can see here we have a couple things going on. One, I want to add to the neck down here, and two, I want to kind of blend this in a little bit as well. So I'm going to choose this color. I'm going to go to my color palette, and instead of black on top, I'm going to choose one of these nude colors. So I can come over and actually eyedropper from the image itself. Choose a new brush size and paint this in some way. So you can really kind of play around with this, and you might have to change the color a couple times. But you can brush it, almost airbrush that in. Let's see, anything else we want to do there. Sometimes I also go back and I use the eraser tool just to kind of, you can blend things a little bit better. If I take my hardness, now I just want it to be a little softer, so you kind of want to play around with your brushes. You can just blend things in a tiny bit better by erasing. So I would play with that a little bit more as well. So what we end up having here is a couple layers. So looking at my layers, and this is why layers are really helpful in Photoshop for creating a hierarchy. Starting at the bottom, we have the original image. And this you might want to print out. I might go in here, make the nose line and the lip line a little bit. You can kind of take a look at the original. I made a copy of that so we're not directly affecting it. I sepia toned the original image. I kind of did more of a artsy feel on this painterly brush filter. Black strokes around it, added to the neck, and then I have the hair on top of that. And that's just a start. You can definitely go back and fine-tune this some more and have some fun with it. At this point, I'm going to save this as a JPEG. So I'm going to go to File, Export, Save for Web. Make sure JPEG is picked from my drop-down, and hit Save.